Hi there. This video is looking at the biophysical factors affecting viticulture and the wine making industry, and I'll be taking you through first of all identify what those biophysical factors are and then explain how they affect the wine industry. So let's have a look at the syllabus. So we're looking obviously at the second dot point, factors explaining the nature, spatial patterns and future direction of selected economic activity, which is viticulture and winemaking. And we're looking at biophysical factors. So when we talk about biophysical factors, we're going to talk about climate, soils, topography and site. So that's what we're going to be focusing on in this little video. So biophysical factors. These are, when growing wine, these factors have a massive influence to determine the character of the wine. So that's why it's so important. Now, I want you just to, before we start, just to press the pause button and answer that question. Why is the character of the wine so important, and how is it related to biophysical factors? I just want you to see if you can try and guess what the relationship is between the two. Okay, so hopefully you've written down something, and the answer to why is the character of wine is so important is because it affects obviously the taste, and if it's a unique taste, it's a unique selling point for wine. So the biophysical factors influence the taste of wine and therefore how much the wine can make in terms of value for the winemaker. So biophysical factors, the natural impacts when growing the wine, have a really important role in the characteristics of wine. So it's massive. So first of all, we're going to have a look at climate, and in particular, we'll break down rainfall in a minute, but let's have a look at temperature. So temperature for the grapes is between 19 degrees for white grapes and 21 degrees Celsius for red grapes. Now, when I say these temperatures, it's not a written rule of thumb, it's just in general, but 19 for white grapes is what is in general. It's not an exact science, and the same for the red grapes as well, 21 degrees Celsius. If the average temperature is below 10 degrees, then the grapes might not be suitable for wine making. So when we look at areas of where to grow, climate is really important, because if we don't have enough heat, then grapes won't be good for wine making, and if it's too hot, it's the same as well. So that's where it affects the spatial patterns of where wine can be grown. And in my previous video, I explained those latitudes and longitudes of where they can grow. So it's really important to link those two together. So there's some points for you, and then the different climate and temperature affects the type of wine. So very hot wines are fortified wines. They're like your brandy and your port. They're very alcoholic, so they're high in alcohol content. They normally come from places like Portugal and Spain, where the temperature is very hot. And then we have our hot temperatures, where we get full-bodied dry white and red wines. Now, when we say full-bodied, we mean that it's a very alcoholic taste to it. As we get sort of cooler climates, the wine changes its flavour, so we get medium body dry white wines and reds as well. Now, when we say a dry white wine, what we mean is when you drink it, you can almost like it tastes a bit like leaves your mouth dry, and that's what we mean by that. And then in cooler temperatures, we have delicate dry white wines, and then the colder temperatures produce sparkling wines. So that's how the climate can affect the wine style. So obviously it affects what type of wine can be grown in different regions. So that's why temperature is really, really important. More on the sunlight, more on the climate. So sunlight, grapes need sunlight to grow. So the more sunlight they receive, the more photosynthesis happen. Therefore, aspect is very important. So aspect is what direction the vineyard faces. So in the southern hemisphere, any north-facing aspects gets more sunlight, particularly in the afternoon, gets that afternoon sun. if it faces south in the southern hemisphere, it's cooler. So it's really important when you go and look at if you're ever tempted into sort of building a vineyard, you need to look at what direction your land faces, because it will affect the amount of sunlight. Then wind. We can't have excessive wind speed, because otherwise they will destroy the grapes when they're on the vines when they're growing. It's rare to find vineyards in areas of high wind, because going back to ecosystems at risk, grapes have a very vulnerable to wind, and don't have the specifications to adapt to windy conditions. So wind can be very dangerous. Rainfall as well. Vines need roughly about 700 millimeters of precipitation each year. That's on average. Some years they can go without and some can go with more, but the rainfall needs to be reliable. Remember, grapes are a crop which will be sold for money, so we need them to grow well, so that we can have a good quality wine. And then frost. We don't want any areas that have frost, because they can obviously destroy the vineyard and the vines and the grapes. So those 4 points there are very important when it comes to climate and looking at the effects on viticulture. Obviously, soils are always important as well, as we know from Ecosystems at Risk and Year 11 Geography, biophysical interactions. Soil varies from place to place, and the soil determines the character and quality of the wine by influencing the water supply and temperature in and above the soil. So yeah, it does have an effect. Basalt soils have a slightly acidic taste to the wines, because basalt is obviously volcanic matter, and the soils are quite acidic, so they do really affect the type of wine grown there. And then topography is obviously the lay of the land, and its relationship between topography and climate plays an important role in determining the character of the grapes. So elevation, aspect and incline of the vineyard must be all taken into account. So obviously we know, and this is going back to Year 11 Geography, as we go higher elevations, altitude, obviously temperatures decrease, lapse rates, I don't know if you remember that, but yeah, that's what happens. Now the higher you go, the cooler it is, so that's got to be taken into account with trying to decide what grapes you're going to grow. So if you're above 2,000 meters, the temperature is going to be roughly about 4 to 6 degrees colder than somewhere at sea level. So that's why you probably wouldn't want to grow red grapes in those regions. So it's really important to look at elevation and the lay of the land, because obviously that's going to affect the way in which grapes are grown. And then something else as well, obviously we're biophysical factors. We've talked a lot about the hydrosphere, amount of water, rainfall plants get. We've talked about lithosphere in soils. We've talked about the atmosphere in terms of climate, how much sun. So the one we haven't looked at is biosphere. So disease and pests are really, really important when it comes to growing grapes. Obviously, grapes, just like any other plant, are prone to a range of disease, and disease can be influenced by climate. That hot, wet, humid weather can increase the amount of fungus and disease. So fungus parasites are responsible for most grape diseases. So fungus parasites, so that's basically like a mold that can pass from grapes to grapes. So when you drive towards Cessnock in the Hunter Valley, there are road signs saying do not bring any more foreign grapevines in, because there is a potential to spread disease there. And if these diseases get into grapes that are going to be used for wine, they can completely destroy them, and that might be several years worth of work for the winemaker gone up in smoke, so it loses money. So it's really important. In the Hunter Valley, example of disease which has caused problems in the past is a disease called powdery mildew. This affects the grapes and turns them mouldy, so the grapes can't be used for wine. So that's how they affect them. Obviously, pests, you've got, birds will eat the grapes as well. Kangaroos might be getting into the paddock and they can knock down grapevines as well. So all diseases and pests are really important as well, and other parts of the biosphere are really important too. Okay, so I've gone through a range of biophysical factors, and as I've gone through each one, I've identified what they are and then how they affected the winemaking and viticulture industry. So I'll be putting some questions up for you to answer. You're doing a great job. Make sure you're doing your Cornell notes, and yeah, keep up the good work. Year 12, we're almost there. All right, thanks. Bye.